This is the Gustav Pro brake set, Magura's first extreme duty brake set that is finally available here in Canada. The Gustavs are a $1,000 plastic brake set that costs more than XTR or Maven Ultimates, and they have a bit of an identity crisis. Despite being out for almost a year and a half now, most of Magura's athletes still choose to run MT7s, and I've spent a few months trying to figure out why that is. Are the Gustavs actually a serious mountain bike brake worth considering, or are they just a cargo e-bike brake that Magura has chosen to dress up in mountain bike clothing? This is one challenging review, and there's a lot to cover, so let's get into it. I purchased this first edition Gustav Pro kit at its full MSRP from a European retailer who probably wasn't allowed to sell it into North America, and as such will remain nameless. These brakes were then installed by Invie Bikes, my local service and custom wheel building shop that has supported my channel for a few years now. They also happen to sell Magura brakes, but due to Magura's staggered global launch, I was able to buy these faster online myself. I have no professional affiliation with Magura, and neither them nor Invie will have any say as to the content of this video. Everything said in this video is my opinion, and I am not receiving any monetary or in-kind compensation for this review. Videos like this one take quite a lot of time and money to produce, so if you'd like to support my honest and independent reviews, Patreon is the best place to do that. I've left a link to my Patreon account in the video description, and I would like to thank all of my current members for helping make these videos possible. Now, most riders will recognize the Magura name, so let's quickly recap their values so that we can score them in the Ethos category. Magura is an extremely German brand, and in this category, that's honestly for the best. Although the website isn't always the easiest to navigate, it contains an impressive depth of information regarding almost all aspects of their business. The buried PDFs are where the real knowledge lies, containing things such as detailed company history, outlines on specific business units, detailed on their composite plastics, and even all of their up-to-date ISO certifications. Although my rods and cones have been seared to the point where whites look purple, Magura's website goes quite a bit beyond what is necessary in terms of complete transparency, and I hope that major brands such as Shimano and Hayes follow similar strategies in the future. Even when the information is buried, having access to it makes ethical and sustainable purchasing decisions a lot easier to make. In terms of giving back to the community by way of sponsoring events, advocacy groups, and elite level riders, Magura seems to be exceptionally average. They list a small number of racing athletes on a now broken page of their website, and have been known to send products to other official ambassadors that are not listed here. It's hard to know exactly how much Magura gives back in terms of money and time to specific organizations, since I could not find that information on their website, but it is definitely more in Europe than it is in North America. Now, we're jumping ahead a little bit here, but in an effort to be as educated a consumer and reviewer as possible, I like to know exactly where the products that I buy are coming from. This is the first way that Magura, and by extension the Gustavs, fell well below my expectations. It is my opinion that Magura deliberately obfuscates where all of their products are made, in the hopes that you associate their proudly German identity with the often incorrect assumption that their products are also manufactured in Germany. Now, I admit that there is a chance that I missed something here, but I could not find a single concrete maiden statement on Magura's packaging, website, or on the brakes themselves. I also asked 2 local shops and a few of my freedom-loving neighbors to verify that I wasn't actually crazy here, and around 6 people were unable to find any mention of where the Gustavs, MT7s, or MT5s were manufactured on their physical product packaging. I have literally never come across a single product where it seemed truly impossible for the customer to tell where it was made. So I decided to reach out politely to Magura HQ and inquire with the experts directly. And knowing what I know now, and will reveal in a minute, their response was quite frankly disgusting. Let's read the relevant parts of their response together. Quote, "Good afternoon, Dale. Thank you for your request and your interest in the Magura products. I know this is not an exact answer, but at the moment, Germany is still given as the country of origin for our aftermarket brakes." Notice the extremely careful language being used in the sentence to leave open the possibility that often their brakes may not actually be made in Germany. The response then continues with some copy and paste information about how Magura is the best, with careful attention to bold and underline the fact that Magura is an international company and employs some 680 employees in Europe, Asia, and the USA to develop, produce, and market their components. The hyperlinked company page was also not particularly useful to my very specific question, although it does mention that Magura Asia operates the production of forks and some disc brakes. Now, I'm not here to shoot the messenger, but I believe that this response is intentionally misleading, and that's very disappointing for a company that is otherwise relatively transparent about their business practices. This response frustrated me enough that I spent a few hours researching product packaging laws in the US, Canada, and the EU. And amazingly, it appears to be perfectly legal in the EU to not disclose the country of origin for most products. However, the rules are a bit stricter here in North America, and provided your product does not fall under a specific list of exempt goods, clear country of origin labeling is a legal requirement for both Canada and the US. But regardless of whether or not hydraulic disc brakes are exempt, which I believe they are more than likely not, what Magura has done here still appears to be illegal. Canada states that, quote, criminal penalties may be assessed where a person marks the goods in a deceptive manner so as to mislead another person as to the country of origin or geographic origin of the goods. The European Union states that, quote, under existing EU legislation, country of origin or place of provenance labeling is voluntary unless its absence could mislead the consumer. And the US states the most clearly that, quote, the phrase made in is required only in the case where the name of any locality other than the country or locality in which the article was manufactured appears on the article or its container and may mislead or deceive the ultimate purchaser. The marking, made in country, or other words of similar meaning, must appear in close proximity to, and in comparable size letters of, the other locality to avoid possible confusion. Now, I'll let you be the judge of where Magura lies on this spectrum. I then reached out to a handful of other contacts that I could find, and within one business day, Magura's USA division was able to give me an answer within 5 words. These are manufactured in Taiwan. Now, I have no idea why Magura HQ would decide to hide this fact. Taiwan has a solid reputation for making high-quality cycling components for far longer than I've been alive, and it should be something that they are proud of, rather than joining the race to the bottom and sourcing the cheapest possible labor from ethically debatable countries. Honestly, I'd probably pick a Taiwanese Chromag over a Canadian one. Sorry, Frank. However, Magura has also been known to dual source components, which is a practice in which they manufacture the same component in multiple locations and then carefully export them around the world in a way that minimizes duties and tariffs in order to maximize profits. The US market brakes may very well all be manufactured in Taiwan, but since my brakes came from Europe, I genuinely have no idea where they were made. For the purposes of this review then, I can only assume that they were made in rural North Korea. I can already hear the comments saying how it may be impossible to identify a single country of origin with such a global supply chain, and although I do get that, every other brand manages to do this without issue, and legally Magura has to do this when importing products into many different countries, including Canada, so they simply just chose not to disclose. My main issue here isn't so much the lack of disclosure, but the blatant misrepresentation. Now maybe none of this bothers you, and that's fine, but misrepresenting a country of origin appears to be an illegal practice in Canada, and it's insulting to your ability to make educated decisions. Magura was on track to score a 6 or a 7, but ultimately they deserve a 4 in my ethos category. This is an absolutely trivial problem for them to fix, so until Magura clearly and explicitly discloses the country of origin for each product on their website, I will not purchase their products, and I recommend you do the same. To say that Magura has significant experience designing hydraulic brakes would be a bit of an understatement. Magura was founded by a German man named Gustav Magura in 1893. After just over 100 years in business, Magura launched their first hydraulic disc brake for bicycles in 1996, and they named it the Gustav M after their founder. Magura claims that this brake had a cult status, and that its success resulted in a whopping 15-year product lifespan, with the final production occurring all the way in 2011. Magura claims that the variants of the Gustav M, including the Louise, Julie, Clara, and Marta, all named after the founders' family members, allow them to assert a, quote, leading role in the broad bicycle market. Admittedly, I am too young to fact-check this statement, although something must have gone horribly wrong in the North American market, given the proportion of market share that Magura has here today. 13 years after the Gustav M's were discontinued, Magura formally launched these new Gustav Pros on June 26, 2024. The Gustav Pro is a 4-piston hydraulic disc brake that is marketed toward EMTB, gravity, SUV, and all road intended uses. This describes an extremely broad spectrum of bikes that requires potentially unique features and performance characteristics, something that will become a bit of a theme throughout today's review. Despite what a few other reviewers have claimed online, Magura mentions nothing about designing the Gustav Pro to be significantly more powerful than other models in their lineup. The product page states, quote, anyone who knows the MT7 knows that we are serious about performance. With this we go one better, for more control, later braking points, and less arm pump. Because anyone can build brakes that stop light bikes, but our latest one slows down even the heaviest bikes with ease, and is therefore predestined for your most powerful e-bikes and gravity machines. Magura have also copied SRAM's homework and classified the Gustav Pro as an extreme duty brake on their website, which is a distinct level higher than their MT7 Pro that falls under the heavy duty category. Magura seems to exclusively market the Gustav Pros using aspirational mountain biking imagery, although it is worth noting that none of the racing athletes that were listed on Magura's athlete page chose to use the Gustav Pro outside of what are obviously sponsored photo shoots, including Danny McCaskill, Alex Rudeau, Fabio Wilmer, Estelle Charles, and Jasper Jausch. Scrolling a bit farther down the product page starts to give us a better idea of who the target customer actually is for these brakes. The most important sentence on the product page is that the Gustav Pro combines stability, power, and modulation like no other brake. Consistent performance from the summit to the valley. With taglines such as more miles, less worries, it is clear that Magura has optimized the Gustavs for long-term reliability and increased service intervals, which is an admirable goal. One way they aim to achieve this is with their new and proprietary 2.5mm thick rotors. At a quick glance, this makes sense. However, they come with a minimum wear limit of 2.1mm, meaning that the usable range of thickness is actually less than many 2.3mm rotors already on the market. Magura has also made a conscious decision not to offer these 2.5mm thick rotors in sizes greater than 203mm because they don't believe that it is necessary. This very well might be true on the streets of Stuttgart, but it's either quite the hubris or a sign of their true intended use. Thankfully, the Gustav calipers are able to accept Magura's standard 2.0 rotors, and the oversized reservoir allows them to be swapped in without having to be rebled. The other way that they aim to increase service intervals is also with their proprietary extra thick brake pad. Nobody knows exactly how thick this new brake pad is, with Magura citing both 94% more wear volume and 40% more brake volume depending on where you look on their website. All I can tell you is that it is thick with 3 C's. For the first nearly year and a half after launch, there was only a single compound available in this pad shape, Magura's black organic compound, designed as an all-rounder for quote sporty riders. This is the brake pad that I believe has shipped with every Gustav brake so far, and what I and likely everyone else has performed all of their testing on. The brake pads are magnetically attached to the pistons in the caliper, much like their MP7 model. 3 days ago, Magura finally announced a second brake pad SKU, this one in their silver compound, though it is not yet up on their USA website. It is very interesting to me that despite marketing the Gustav as an extreme duty brake, Magura has decided to still not offer their most aggressive gold or yellow pad compound or larger diameter rotors. Another curiosity is the 2-finger brake lever. The aluminum lever is massive, and that was a point of contention among some of the earliest reviewers of this brake set. Many mentioned that due to the shape of the lever blade and the oversized fluid reservoir, they were unable to dial in the lever blade to sit as close to the handlebar as they would have preferred. I run my lever blades quite far away from the handlebar, so I did not encounter this issue. But I bring it up because it was a commonly requested revision at the time, Magura said that they would revise it, and here we are a year and a half later with, to my knowledge, the exact same lever blade. It is also worth noting that Magura ships all spare Gustav parts pre-filled with brake fluid to make replacing them as painless as possible. The plastic Gustav Pros retail for 1,000 double-doubles, which is approximately 724 shutdowns or 610 socialisms. Borrowing yet another page from SRAM's playbook, Magura also offered a first edition kit which consists of 2 brakes, 2 rotors, and 2 post-mount adapters. Unfortunately, they cheaped out on not including a bleed kit, additional rotor sizes, multiple pad compounds, or a cool limited edition colorway, while also charging more money. SRAM has truly set the bar impressively high with the value of their expert kits. The Gustav Pro First Edition kit is the one that I purchased, and it is only available in Europe for 720 healthcares. This price point places the Gustavs decidedly into the luxury realm of brakes, and as you'll find out today, they very much do not deserve to play here. In a move that screams, wait for me, I'm still relevant, the Gustav Pros were also not available for purchase at the time they were announced, and not even close in North America. I tried to purchase these brakes for several months after they were announced last June, and it wasn't until April 23rd of this year that I finally took delivery of this kit. To this very day, I have yet to encounter these brakes in the wild. Magura also offers cheaper Gustav Elite and Louise Elite models now, but we'll save that story for another day. Now, the first 2 questions that I've been asked on the trail when someone sees these brakes are, what are they? And 2, why are they so big? It's no secret that the Gustav Pro has prioritized function over aesthetics, which is a bold move in such a fashion-based industry at a $1,000 price point. The calipers are what I would call oversized, but they do not look out of place in a world where mavens exist. They have clean, sharp lines throughout, and a relatively minimalist design language that is unmistakably Magura. I would even go as far as saying these calipers are actually pretty nice aesthetically. The levers are a different story though. The ABS-optimized oversized reservoir is an eyesore with an injection molded plastic finish that can be only described as cheap compared to many other CNC metal designs. There are several different shades of gray to black across multiple materials and surface finishes, along with a large QR code that serves no clear purpose proudly displayed on the side. Magura's marketing department prefers to refer to this material as their proprietary carbo texture, but ultimately it's just a plastic composite. The distinctly 2-finger lever blade is, spoiler, indicative of the Gustav's true intended use, and also raises questions on the trail. The word Pro is also proudly etched onto both sides of the lever blade, so that whether you're riding the bike park or commuting down a gravel path on a cargo bike, you are always reminded that you are, indeed, a pro. The most unfortunate part aesthetically though is the lack of customization, something that has become a bit of a staple among Magura's MT lineup. Magura does not currently offer any other insert colors apart from yellow or gray on the calipers or levers, nor do they appear to offer any customizable faceplates for individual riders or shops. Thankfully, I like yellow, but not everyone does, and I wish this limited edition kit had a fun colorway to match. Despite what Magura may claim with his spelling mistake, I think the Gustavs look a bit pregnant, like they're expecting an MT7, which is convenient since I will be reviewing them shortly, so I think it's fair to award them a 4 out of 10 for their aesthetics, which aligns with the reactions that I've seen on the trail. Adjustability is another rough category for the Gustav Pros. For a brake that's been optimized around reducing maintenance and increasing consistency, this shouldn't really come as a surprise, but it was a bit worse than I had hoped. The Gustav Pros have a toolless reach adjustment dial that they claim is beautifully integrated into the lever and is therefore particularly well protected. While this is likely true, it is a particularly stiff dial too, and its location makes it very difficult to turn without getting multiple fingers and even fingernails involved. There are no adjustments present for either bite point or leverage ratio kinematics. The biggest issue I encountered, however, was that the oversized reservoir completely prevented my ring clamp shifter from being mounted in an even remotely usable position. This feels less malicious than SRAM's stealth design, since the Gustav's reservoir provides at least 2 functional benefits, although it is disappointing that I would have to get a direct mount shifter for it to be mounted in a usable position. Magura's shift mix adapter isn't perfect either, and it allows for 0 rotational adjustment of the shifter relative to the lever blade about the handlebar's axis, so I find it unlikely that you'll be able to reach your ideal shifter position no matter what. Brake pads are another adjustability aspect where you'll take what you can get, as Magura continues to only offer a single brake pad compound for sale in this proprietary Gustav shape. Don't expect to see any brake pad inventory at your local bike shop, especially here in North America. Thankfully, the calipers are compatible with rotors between 2 and 2.5 millimeters, although if you're insistent on the thick boys, your options are severely limited to only 2 sizes in one mounting standard. The Gustav Pros deserve a 3 out of 10 for their below average level of adjustability, particularly when it comes to their use of proprietary standards. Moving on to build quality, I definitely have concerns about the Gustav Pros, but let's start off with the positives first. The calipers are very nicely made. The one-piece forged body is unapologetically aggressive and looks fantastic, with a tasteful sprinkling of machined marks intentionally left over from the manufacturing process. The post-mount adapter is also closely aligned to the contours of the caliper, making it feel like a more premium product for next to no cost. The levers utilize a hinged split clamp with a single T25 screw, and thankfully it's a boring old machine screw too. I see this as a huge upgrade over the prior deck screw handlebar clamp design that is still present on many of their models, including the MT7s. I honestly don't care if that old design was structurally sufficient or not, since I was always terrified to adjust my cockpit setup on the trail without a torque wrench every time. Having a single bolt that threads directly into the opposite side of the small, replaceable metal clamp is a welcome relief over the old design that both feels more premium and will help reduce warranty claims on Magura's end too. The lever blade alone feels adequately strong, with a nice textured surface finish and contact patch for your braking finger, even if it's clearly a sinful 2-finger design. Unfortunately, that's where my compliments end and my criticisms begin. These brakes arrived with some noticeable cosmetic damage to both the lever blade and both clamps, along with several sharp edges that absolutely should have been deburred in the manufacturing process. Although I do not personally mind since all bikes will get scratched eventually, these defects are not acceptable for a brand new product at a $1,000 price point. Despite having not been bled or touched at all, my rear caliper also appears to have either a slow leak or some residual oil present from around the bleed port at the factory, as it has collected plenty of dust from the trail in the moisture radiating around this zone. Magura has once again chosen to go with their carbotexture material for the master cylinder, which is a marketing euphemism for a fancy plastic injection molded part. Although it is purely anecdotal, Magura seems to have a disproportionately strong market share of riders walking out of the woods after a brake failure from a crash. Even if the simulations say that the plastic is strong enough, and even if the failure rates match the industry average, plastic will continue to be considered an inferior brake master material for years to come, at least as far as build quality goes. The fact that Magura has chosen to design a predetermined failure point onto the lever blade itself to, quote, ensure that the brake master is less damaged in the event of a fall is a decent sign that a plastic composite just might not be the ideal material here. Again, it's anecdotal, but I've seen tons of bent SRAM lever blades over the years, and I've never yet seen a damaged master cylinder where the lever blade attaches. One of my viewers reached out and sent me a photo of what his lever looked like after a crash on his very first ride, where you can clearly see a failed plastic master cylinder body and a perfectly intact aluminum lever blade. Now, I obviously don't expect the notch to eliminate every possible failure mode, but I certainly found this to be pretty damn funny. I also had the lever rotate on my handlebars twice while riding when the clamp was tightened to the prescribed torque spec of 5 Newton meters. I understand wanting to have the lever be able to rotate in the event of a crash, but it absolutely cannot rotate while riding down the trail. I then applied a small amount of extra torque to prevent this movement, but I was not confident in going much tighter without stripping out the threads. Sticking with the lever, both of my lever blades have a noteworthy amount of play in the direction perpendicular to braking. It is arguably more of a flex than it is a play, as there is no noise associated with this movement, and it is fairly linearly correlated with the applied force. One of my levers also has a tactile and barely audible click when the brake is squeezed, which feels similar to when you need to crack your fingers, even while riding on smooth trails. The other lever exhibits no such behavior, which is both welcoming and troubling. The amount of play present in a brake targeted toward extreme duty riding is concerning though, and it is honestly a bit offensive at $1,000. One of, if not the most expensive mass-produced brake sets ever, should not have one of the sloppiest assemblies I've seen since a used pair of SRAM Code-Rs. The Gustav Pros don't feel unsafe per se, but they don't feel particularly well made either, regardless of price, so they deserve a 4 out of 10 in the build quality category. This puts them on par with Shimano's cheapest 4-piston brake set, the MT420s, while being roughly the same price as their XTR model. Thankfully, setting up the Gustav Pros turned out to be extremely easy. Imbi generously offered to install these brakes for me despite never having actually seen a pair in person before, and that's how rare they still are in North America. Thanks again to Imbi for their continued support of my channel, and these brake reviews in particular. The Gustav used Magura's proprietary Royal Blood mineral oil, which is standard across Magura's lineup, and a fact that you'd never need to know since we never had to bleed them at all. It is still unfortunate that Magura cheaped out when it came to this limited edition kit though, at least compared to SRAM's expert kits, as no bleeding tools or fluid were included. Since the levers have a symmetrical or flippable design, they can be easily used on either side of the handlebar and swapped between front and rear without having to disconnect the hoses. This also means that both brakes in my first edition kit were identical, and both 2-meter hoses had to be trimmed down to length before riding. Connecting the hoses is a very straightforward process as long as you follow the instructions carefully. After inserting the trimmed hose into the master cylinder, the only unintuitive step is that you now have to pull the lever until you hear a cracking noise that signifies that fluid is now able to flow freely through the system. We weren't particularly careful with the rear brake hose, and we definitely lost a bit of fluid when we trimmed it to length, but the bite point felt nearly identical to the front brake, which had virtually no fluid loss once everything was connected together. Magura talks a lot about how their Easy Link and Easy Tube technologies help to make installation as painless as possible, including not having to bleed them at all during installation, so it was nice to see this marketing point become a tangible benefit. They also ship all of their spare levers and calipers pre-filled with oil so that they are as easy to replace as possible if needed. Since both of my brakes felt identical, a bleed was absolutely not required, but we read through the Gustav's bleeding procedure anyway and found no major difference between it and the standard MT7 Pro. Magura brakes have a reputation for being slightly more complex than average to bleed, although I have not personally had to bleed their brakes before. Magura's servicing documentation is more than adequate, with clear videos in several languages outlining common procedures. For a German company though, with a stereotypical emphasis on accuracy and completeness, I did find it hilarious that this gem slipped through the cracks.
Slowly squeeze the Magura Royal Blood from the lower syringe into the brake system. Make sure that no air is pressed into the system and that the caliper...
It's much funnier when you realize though that Magura has deleted a few comments that reference this bubble too. Thankfully, the whole point of the Gustav line is that service will be required a lot less frequently. In terms of spare parts, Magura primarily offers major assemblies, such as complete calipers and masters without lever blades, rather than individual parts to the level of detail that brands like SRAM offer. Apart from their lack of pistons and piston seal kits, I find Magura's spare parts availability to be adequate for most situations. Where the Gustavs fall short is in their consumables availability. The proprietary brake pad is not always in stock, and I've yet to find a third party that produces brake pads for the Gustav Pro in my research, despite them being out for almost a year and a half now. The 2.5mm thick rotors are also very hard to come by. I'm going to score the Gustavs at a 7 out of 10 for overall serviceability, brought up by the easy link connection and intentionally long maintenance intervals, but held back by the lack of commonly available consumables and average bleeding complexity. And now it's finally time to talk about performance. Despite using Imbi's fancy brake bedding machine prior to riding, the Gustavs required 2 full 1000 meter rides before getting up to full power. This is not overly surprising at my 63 kilogram weight, but it is less common with organic brake pads. Pinkbike claimed that Magura told them, quote, "Thanks to a combination of features, mainly power, pad surface area, and rotor stiffness, the brakes don't need a prescribed bedding in, and you can just get on and ride." This does not line up with my personal experience, nor does it line up with what was outlined in the Gustav Pro's owner's manual. Once everything was set up to my liking, the Gustav Pros were fine. Not amazing, not terrible, but completely fine. An underwhelming word for an underwhelming product. Thanks for watching. Okay, I'll dive into more detail. According to their marketing copy, Magura has aimed to design a brake that offers consistent performance from the summit to the valley, allowing you to ride more miles with less worries. And by that measure, in a vacuum, I'd say that the Gustav Pros are an easy success. The first 4 words that come to mind when describing this brake are intuitive, predictable, consistent, and safe. The Gustav Pros feel like an MT7 that's at least 1 rotor size more powerful, with a slightly firmer bite point and a more solid feeling metal lever blade. This already makes the Gustav Pros the best Magura brake that I've used, but unlike traditional media, I feel it would be disingenuous not to compare it to other options available on the market. If you've never used a Magura brake before, its force curve can be best described as extremely linear, almost bordering on regressive. This results in a brake that is extremely intuitive to use and easy to get familiar with the words good modulation frequently being tossed around it, but also one that struggles to produce a high peak power without an intentionally hard squeeze of the lever blade. I'd say it's almost difficult to accidentally apply enough force to make you go over the handlebars, even when first getting used to these brakes. In general, this linear characteristic makes Magura brakes a decent option for lighter riders, or those who ride trails intended for cross-country or trail bikes in flatter parts of the world. It's a very predictable curve that just about anybody could hop on and immediately understand, but it will begin to struggle in steep, sustained terrain, especially under heavier riders. Speaking of struggling, the dead stroke lever force of the Gustav Pros is higher than I would like to see at such a premium price point, and higher than the market average. I found that the dead stroke force required was similar to that of the new SRAM motives, and that was approaching my limit on sustained laps, dropping several hundred meters of elevation in one go. This finger and hand pain would begin to show up after about 2 minutes of sustained riding in steep terrain, and basically never on blues and blacks, but I never had to pull over because of it. Any reviewer that claims that the Gustav Pro has a beautifully light dead stroke has clearly never tried anything from Hayes, Hope, Intend, Trickstuff, Radek, 612, or Lewis. A light dead stroke force goes a long way toward reducing rider fatigue, as it's something that you have to overcome every time you squeeze the lever, like a rep of literally any other workout. I'm also thrilled to report this time that I'm not the only person who has specifically mentioned this aspect of the Gustav Pros, with Ralph Hauser from bikeboard.cc writing, quote, "In particularly technical and steep sections, I could not shake the thought that it would be nice if one could exert less hand force during braking. Moreover, the lever distance to the handlebar could not be adjusted ideally for personal preferences." Thank you, Ralph, for being more diplomatic than I am. The dead stroke lever throw distance before the pads make contact is very average and perfectly manageable on trail, though I would appreciate a bite point adjustment feature in order to minimize this distance as much as possible. If I had to draw a direct comparison, I'd say that the Gustav Pros are most similar to the previous generation TRP DHR Evos, except with a slightly firmer bite point and a heavier dead stroke from the SRAM motive. Although the Gustavs were fine for me, I definitely prefer having something more powerful and less fatiguing that is able to generate a higher output force with a lower input force. Their combination of a stiff return spring in the lever with an extremely linear force curve makes me hesitant to recommend these to riders that are heavier than I am, who enjoy riding similar terrain too. In general, I would not recommend a Magura brake to riders on the heavier end of the spectrum. You can find a lot more power elsewhere for cheaper, and I don't believe that the Gustav Pros deserve to be lumped into the Clydesdale category of brakes alongside the Tech 4 V4, Dominions, Mavens, Maximas, and LHTs. They might be adequate, but I wouldn't call them particularly powerful by any definition of that word. I also struggle to recommend the Gustav Pros to trail and cross-country riders, despite what the curves and my experience may suggest, because there are many options available that are significantly cheaper, lighter, and with a better availability of consumables. I also did not notice any performance benefits from the proprietary 2.5mm rotors during my testing. This once again leads me to the conclusion that this brake set was designed primarily for the e-city bike demographic before an executive with a curly mustache stepped in to ask why they couldn't also be marketed as a mountain bike brake set as well in order to make more money. After all, the line must only go up. Ultimately, the Gustav Pro is one of the best brakes that I can think of for beginner mountain bikers at a price point that is only accessible to wealthy enthusiasts. They're relatively uninspiring and aren't the best in any particular skill, offering good modulation in exchange for disappointing top-end power. But they're safe, predictable, and just fine, giving them a 7 out of 10 in the performance category. If it sounds like I'm being harsh, remember that they cost $1,000 and very few of their athletes are actually using them. Moving on to invisibility, and this is an area where the Gustavs shined. Throughout my nearly 10,000 meters of ride testing, they remained perfectly consistent, and I have very few things to report here. They never wandered, they never pumped up, and they never faded. I stored them in my black car for a few days at the time where the interior temperature would peak to around 45 to 50 degrees in the afternoon, and I also stored the bike hanging in the vertical position for several days at a time. The Gustavs remained unfazed by any of these environmental and storage conditions. Apart from the occasional hand and finger pain discussed previously, which is worth 2 points here, the only issue I encountered was a ringing rotor on the climbs for my first 3 rides. Apparently this is a relatively common issue with Magura brakes, where the pads will rub the rotors unless the pistons are evenly advanced and perfectly aligned on the brake mount. I am happy to report that this ringing noise completely disappeared after the 3rd ride, no matter how hot or cold the brakes were. I also noticed that when a constant light amount of force was applied to the lever, enough to maintain speed on a moderate downhill, a pulsing sensation could be felt through the lever blade, similar to how ABS feels in the brake pedal of a car. Although the Gustavs are optimized for ABS integration, I am very confident that it's not installed by default, and typically this would indicate that the rotor is likely warped. If I were to keep this brake set around, I would diagnose this further, but this was only a minor annoyance on slabs and rock rolls. The brake pads were silent with no rattling, squealing, or unpleasant noises to speak of. The levers make a hope-like clacky noise when played with, although this is only something that you'll notice if you are fidgeting on the climb, never actually while riding downhill. Overall, the Gustavs get a 7 out of 10 in the invisibility category, as I had to think about them less than average while riding down the trail. In terms of innovation, there is nothing innovative about these brakes while riding down the trail. Introducing a new rotor thickness, a new brake pad shape, and new brake pad thicknesses also doesn't count as innovation. Where the Gustavs stand out in this category is with their Easy Link and Easy Tube technology. Magura advertises these brakes as being plug and play for your brake hose, citing that after installation you can simply click the brake hose with the Easy Link into the brake master, bleeding and other work steps are no longer necessary. And we found this to be absolutely the case as long as your hose is the correct length, without having to be particularly careful during the installation process. Having pre-filled spare calipers and levers is a nice bonus and really shows that Magura is committed to reducing time spent in the workshop as much as possible. Allegedly, they also made these brakes easier to bleed too, although I've never had to try my luck at that, thankfully. The best bleed is no bleed at all, and it's nice to see such an elegant system designed for this task. It's also worth mentioning that this new connection allows the hose to rotate freely about its central axis at the master cylinder, much like the Intent Trinity, allowing for your hose to remain in its lowest energy state at all times. This will help clean up your cable routing by preventing the hoses from twisting. For these features alone, I'm going to score the Gustavs at a 7 out of 10 in the innovation category, and I hope that they implement all of these features into their brakes going forward. For reliability, the standard asterisk applies, but I am confident that Magura has delivered a quality product here. Magura has clearly focused on keeping you out of the workshop as much as possible, and that goes further than just the life of their consumables. The Gustavs have been out for almost a year and a half now, and although I can find a handful of isolated incidents online, there don't appear to be any systemic issues that are inherent to this design. My experience was essentially flawless, with no indications that these brakes will be anything but reliable for years to come. I completely understand people's hesitancy about having a plastic master cylinder in the event of a crash, and I truly share your concerns here. But time in the market doesn't lie, and the Gustav Pros appear to be doing better than average when it comes to reliability. And if your brakes do end up leaking, Magura has a 5-year leak-proof guarantee that should help keep your mind at ease, something that I'm glad to see becoming the de facto standard in this category. I'm going to score the Gustavs at an 8 out of 10 for reliability, the highest score I'm willing to award a brake that is primarily made from plastic. And finally, we have value. Should you spend your hard-earned money on a set of Gustav Pros? Setting aside price for a second, the Gustavs are a fine brake. They're safe and predictable with no glaringly obvious red flags. If their OEM pricing is attractive enough, I could see these brakes arriving pre-installed on a handful of mountain bikes in the future, and in most parts of the world, I'd question whether replacing them would be even worth the hassle. But I'm very lucky to be able to live in a beautiful part of the world, surrounded by some of the best mountain biking trails on the planet, trails that consistently demand a lot of me and my equipment. The Gustav's performance isn't mind-blowing, and it certainly isn't worthy of the extreme duty label that they give it. In a blind test, I'd put their on-trail performance in line with what is commonly expected around the 400 to 450 Canadian range, on par with Shimano's legendary MT520s, their Dior M6120s, and of course the Lewis LH4s. Unfortunately, the Gustav Pros are not in this price range. They are more than double it at $1,000 Canadian. This makes them $140 more expensive than Shimano's brand new flagship XTR brakes that I'll likely be testing shortly, spoiler, and $130 more expensive than the Maven Ultimates, and arguably most offensively, $25 more expensive than the small batch Radic Kahas. I don't understand how Magura expects to be taken seriously here when they're charging a luxury flagship price for a mass-produced plastic brake with no outstanding performance characteristics. I'd argue that the Gustav Pros are a product without a customer, and unless your bike looks like this, or this, or this, My suggestion is that you go look at a brake that was designed for mountain biking from the get-go. The Gustav Pros get a 2 out of 10 for value, with the first edition getting a 3 out of 10 purely on their aftermarket appeal, rather than my desire to take them off complete bikes because they're fine. Add them all up and the total is 53 out of 100, which places them here against all of the other brakes that I have significant experience with. As the saying goes, a jack of all trades is a master of none, and that couldn't hold more true than for the Gustav Pros. Pricing aside, these brakes are fine on a serious mountain bike. They're not bad, they're not amazing, they're just fine. They aren't particularly powerful, the build quality is disappointing, and they certainly won't be winning any styling awards, but they are highly consistent, predictable, intuitive, and most importantly, safe. The Gustavs are far from the worst brakes that I've tried. That honor will always go to the 𝙎𝙼𝙾, I hope. But I've never struggled more to understand who the target customer truly is for a given product. The increased brake pad thickness is nice for reducing service intervals, but I'd rather have a standard pad shape that is offered in multiple compounds and third-party options. The XL oil reservoirs should help reduce the frequency of brake bleeds, but they prevent ring clamp mounted shifters and dropper remotes from being mounted in a usable position. The proprietary 2.5mm thick rotors offer a shorter lifespan than several existing 2.3mm options, while both weighing and costing significantly more. Heavier riders will struggle with the lack of top-end power, something that is especially puzzling given Magura's hubris of deliberately only offering up to 203mm rotors in this new proprietary thickness. The Easy Link connection is excellent, and I hope that Magura incorporates this into all future models, but it does nothing to improve on-trail performance. I'd personally rather have these brakes than anything from SRAM, but it would be a toss-up between these and Shimano if they came on a complete build, and I see no reason why an aftermarket buyer should be particularly interested here. Ultimately, the Gustav Pros are an uncompelling product with a luxury price tag, and most riders would be better served by many cheaper options out there, while also supporting brands that don't try to deliberately mislead their customers as to where their products are manufactured. Take your $1,000, buy a set of hopes, and treat yourself to a nice weekend riding trip with a not insignificant leftover cash. You can thank me later. Now it's time to talk directly to the manufacturer. Dear Magura, I struggled with this review more than your brakes struggle with their own identity. That's why it took me so long. The Gustav Pros are not a bad product, they're honestly pretty far from it, but a number of the design decisions make me question what their original intended use was. It feels like you designed the perfect eSUV or e-cargo bike brake, and then some executive in a suit who only plays golf suggested that it could be also marketed toward mountain bikers because technically it can do that too. I actually think it's pretty clear reading between the lines here too. Optimized for ABS, prioritized long service intervals, still only selling a single brake pad SKU, only offering original 2-finger lever blades even after promising that that would be changed, and none of your athletes even use this brake outside of obviously sponsored content. I've still yet to run into these brakes in the wild, and I ride quite a lot, which suggests that the man in the suit might not have made the right call here. In a world where brands like Lewis exist, fine just isn't good enough anymore. And it's more than a little bit offensive to be charging more than boutique erratic 𝙎𝙾 prices for a mass-produced injection molded plastic brake. But my biggest gripe here is actually with what is, in my opinion, your deliberate attempts to obfuscate and misrepresent your countries of origin as much as possible. Not only is misleading potential customers illegal in many of the markets that you sell into, it's a bold strategy in a world where customers are increasingly informed about the products that they buy. It also happens to be a personal red line for me, and I will continue to recommend that customers avoid buying products from, in my opinion, intentionally shady companies, of which you are the only brake manufacturer. Until your website is updated, I will continue to assume that your non-USA brakes are made in rural North Korea. Consumer advocacy is obviously something that I am deeply passionate about, and I hope that you see this as the opportunity for growth that I do. And please, please make your website less yellow. It's my favorite color too, but my eyeballs simply can't do it anymore. Thanks for watching.